So I'm Lucinda Flynn and I'm co-founder of Going Green Solutions, the business. I'm also really into food gardening and permaculture, but I'm also an independent accredited residential energy efficiency assessor, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So I want to give you a bit of a tour of our house and just explain some of the things that we've done. Now, I do want to preface it by saying that as with anything, there are a million ways to do something, and your goals will help you choose how to go about it. We've lived in this house for about 18 years. When we moved here, we knew that it was a long-term plan, and we didn't intend to be leaving here until we were too old, basically. Because we knew we were going to be here for a long time, basically until we were too old to live here, and also because the house itself is, you know, it's a 70s house, but we also joke that the apprentices must have made it because there's some really wonky parts in it. It's built perfectly fine, like it's strong and everything, but the angles are a bit off, and so at the top of some windows, you know, the top of the window will be there and the roof line will be like that. So it's like they didn't have a spirit level or something. But anyway, so the combination of knowing we were going to stay here for a long time and that it's not like a beautifully built house in the first place meant that our goals are different to someone who might be only planning on staying in a house for, say, 5 years, and it's heritage and beautifully made and they need to get a really good price for it. So for us, we decided that we were going to renovate it for our comfort, as opposed to spending extra money on making it a perfect professional job. So if you're watching this and you want to see how to do things professionally and beautifully, might not be the right place, but if you have your own house, want to do a lot of DIY and low cost renovations and upgrades, then absolutely watch on. The house itself, I've mentioned it's a 70s house, and it had all of the typical inefficiencies of a 70s house. It's half brick veneer and half weatherboard. Weatherboard houses are really hard to keep warm. They're just so notoriously leaky. It's also on a hill, so it's on stilts, which also makes it hard to keep warm because there's a lot of airflow underneath. But we've brought it from being pretty much like a sieve to now being a 10-star scorecard home. So I'd like to show you how. I'll go through each of the sections one by one. As always, let me know if you have any questions and I'll write back to you or elaborate with another video. Thanks for watching, and we'll start. We started when we first knew that we wanted to make our home more energy efficient and more comfortable, was we got a home energy efficiency assessor to come and look at our house. And this is something that I really highly recommend to anyone who wants to take these steps. We had Ecomaster come over. Morris from Ecomaster came and did a really extensive report on our house. He took photos, and the 20-page or so report had photos of the issues and what we could do to fix them, plus a quote if they did them. In fact, the report had so many eye-opening things in it that's what inspired me to become a home energy efficiency assessor, because there were so many things that I didn't even know were issues. And I realized that probably most of the people around me also didn't realize they were issues. So that was a fantastic way to begin. And I think for me, the biggest reason to start with that is that that person can help you identify exactly what the issues are and what changes you can make in what order to give you the best effect. Of course, if you want to go and investigate everything yourself, there are a lot of resources you can turn to, and you can work those things out yourself. But for the average person, I think having someone come who knows all the ins and outs is just a fantastic way to get a sort of roadmap of what to do. So we did that, and one of the main things that Morris pointed out that we had no idea about was the importance of draughts. We're in Victoria in Australia, in Melbourne, and the houses in this state are notoriously leaky. They are really poorly built, and they say that if you added up all the gaps and cracks and draughts in the average old, like our house, 70s, 80s house, it would add up to about a metre squared window being open all the time. And that seems really shocking, but if you look at some houses, I go in and assess them, and I can see that it would be pretty accurate, especially if you have things like open fireplaces. But even without that, a lot of houses from that era have permanently vented toilet and bathroom windows. They have unsealed exhaust fans that are just a hole straight into the ceiling. There's a whole lot of ways, but the purpose of this video is to talk you through all of these sections, and I'll also do it in the order that works for most people. And that order is draft proofing, very first, most important thing. Even if it's the only thing you ever do, it's worthwhile. Second one is ceiling insulation, also incredibly important. About 45% of heat loss can be through the ceiling. Then getting a bit harder, possibly more expensive, well, not possibly, but further things you can do down the track are windows, number 3, then wall and underfloor insulation, and then we move on to appliances. Before, I guess, in order of things to do, I was just talking about building shell. The building shell is basically how good your house is at keeping warm air either in or out, depending on the climate you live in and what your intentions are. So the building shell is it's integral and so important. No matter what, you can have the most energy efficient form of heating there is, but if you've got the equivalent of a 1 metre window open all the time, that heating is going to, first of all, you're not going to be comfortable because it just has to work so hard to try and keep up the heat, and it's going to cost a lot more because it's running more. So everything you can do to your building shell is going to help you in the long run. Anyway, I will get started, and the first thing I'm going to talk about is various kinds of drafts. We're now under our sink, and this is a really common place for there to be gaps, either where plumbing has been fitted or electrical things. So, I just spoke to someone recently who said that they had a new oven put in, and now when they stand in front of the oven, they can feel a breeze blowing. So obviously, the tradesperson who put it in has cut a hole somewhere and not bothered to fix it up. This one you can see has been well fitted. I have seen it before where those the parts that are going through the wall just have holes around them. You can see straight out. This one has been well covered up, but it's worthwhile walking around your house everywhere where something has been fitted through the wall or through the ceiling. That's called the building envelope, and you need to see where it's been penetrated and if there are still gaps there and fill them up. So this is a ceiling vent, and it's above our shower. We also have one where the laundry used to be in our house. This is just like wall vents. Ceiling vents predate exhaust fans, so they're pretty much just holes in the ceiling. There's no exhaust attached to it. It just allows air to be sucked up into the ceiling space. And like the wall vents, it's a constant draft that you can't close it. So these are worthwhile shutting up. This one you can't see that we've closed it because we haven't. I mean, you could take it out or you could fill in all those gaps with plaster, but we haven't bothered doing that. We've just sealed it from the top. So it's sealed at the top and covered in insulation, no longer a gap. This used to be a permanently open glass louver window in our toilet. Again, very common in 60s, 70s, 80s houses. And it's just a constant big draft into and out of the home. So even if you have the door closed, say, to the toilet or bathroom that it's in, unless that door is weatherproofed, it's still going to be pulling air in and out of the house. So we had a handyman just cut some clear acrylic to size, and he attached it with wooden beading, and he actually put 2 layers on just to give us that bit of extra insulating effect. Newly built houses have really much higher standards in air tightness, and so they're likely to have self-sealing exhaust fans fitted. But this one that I'm showing you is the classic example of an old style exhaust fan from, you know, our age house, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, even possibly later than that. They just always used to be non-self-sealing. And what that means is that on top of that fan, it's just a hole straight into the ceiling space. And you can tell this, if you have one, by putting on the bathroom light and then going up the manhole and looking towards where the fan is. And if you can see the light, you know that it's unsealed. Again, be careful if you're going to be using a ladder. But there is a simple way to fix this, and that is by adding something called a draft stopper over the top of that fan in the ceiling space. So it's just a, I'll put a link to it, but it's a plastic sort of round thing that has flaps. When you turn the fan on, the flap, just the movement of air up opens the flaps, and when you turn the fan off, the flaps close. So it's a non-mechanical way of stopping air being constantly pulled out of that exhaust fan. Does your house have wall vents? This has been sealed up, but it still shows the outline, and it's very common in 70s and 80s houses. There's another one over there. When a house has them, it often has 2 in every room. Now, these are from times past when people had open fireplaces, unflued gas heaters and kerosene heaters and things like that that just needed permanent ventilation. But if you have them and you go into a newer house, you'll notice they just don't exist. No such thing. And that's because what they really are is permanent ventilation. And we call that drafts. Ventilation is fantastic and needed, but you need to be able to control it. So that's the thing about draft proofing. It's not about shutting up the house so that it never gets any air. It's about making sure that the ventilation you have is controllable and not just endless. So the first thing we did in our house is we filled up our wall vents. Pretty sure we just used a tube of no more gaps, squeezed it in and covered it over, and you can see we've painted over it. There are also wall vent covers you can buy at hardware stores. You can fill them with plaster and smooth it over and paint so you wouldn't even know they were there. Again, like I said, we were doing the sort of easy, cheap ways to do things, and this is how it turned out. And we don't mind that the ridges show there. A really common place for drafts is around doors and windows, especially in an older house that may have moved. Houses do tend to move, and wooden frames and window frames and door frames can easily just slightly move out of place, and suddenly they don't close as well as they used to. So the simplest way to draft seal is with this kind of just DIY hardware store rubber. So it comes in a roll, and it's got a self-adhesive backing on it, and it also comes in various widths, and that's really important because with doors and windows that have moved, sometimes the top might have moved and the bottom hasn't, or at least at a different width. So you need to be able to mix and match for the window to make sure it fits. And I can show you how. Well, so this is the spot where we've changed from a thicker thickness to a smaller one. And those sort of seals go around the sides and the top of windows and doors. I should point out you can get foam seals and this sort of rubber. The rubber's better. The foam disintegrates pretty quickly, so you might have to keep redoing it, and this will at least last a bit longer. Now, you can get professional draft sealing done, and it's a fantastic service. It will be much more permanent seals than this is, but if you're looking for a DIY option, then this is very easy to do and very cheap to buy. The other thing with this is you can, like I said, mix and match your widths, but you can also put it on this side of the door and the other side, the part of the door that is attached to it if you need. Well, I'm trying to explain. What I mean is you can put some on the other side as well. This is the old skylight in the bathroom. So that skylights are very notoriously leaky as well. And usually, well, quite frequently, you can see that just by the amount of leaves and dirt and debris that ends up down the bottom of them. The only way that's getting in is because it's got big gaps around it. So ours used to be open at the bottom, just had some sort of a grid of plastic, but it wasn't a fixed grid. It was just sort of sitting there, diffusing light probably. So we cut another sheet of Perspex and put it across there so that it's completely sealed. And then we got a second sheet and added that with a little gap in between to give a bit of a double glazing effect. After draft proofing, the next most important part of making your home energy efficient is ceiling insulation. Many people have never looked in their ceiling, and it's a really interesting thing to do. Because people don't go typically look in the ceiling, there can be all sorts of issues with your ceiling insulation that you might not realise. In fact, sometimes people have none at all and don't even know. So have a look up in your ceiling if you can. If you're going to use a ladder, make sure you know how to use it properly. The key with ceiling insulation is both thickness and coverage. So an old house, such as, say if we had the original insulation from when this house was built, it would probably be almost nothing. Perhaps some cellulose, just sort of pulpy stuff that's blown in. Then if it's a 90s house or a 2000 house, it might have something like R.3 insulation, but really R.5 is the way to go. So if you have really low insulation to start with, it's worth upgrading to that. If you already have, say, R3.5, it might not be worth that because of the diminishing return. I'll explain that concept in a minute. But just for insulation, you can see that we've topped up our insulation a lot. It's polyester. It's probably R6 or R5.5 at the moment. It's been updated twice since we moved here. So first we updated it from the 70s insulation to about R2.5 or 3, and then recently we upgraded it again. The other thing, so that's the thickness. The other thing is coverage. It's really important that you get good coverage, because if there are gaps in your ceiling insulation add up to more than 5% of the total area, it halves the value of how it functions. So you can see that we have it, it's been very carefully put around, there's no gaps. Every little gap has been filled up. The other thing is it needs to go right into the corners, right under the eaves, and around anything else. Like this is the really old hot water system that was in the roof, and they typically have a lot of, because they're usually on some sort of base that's had to be put in the roof so it doesn't fall through the roof, and there's gaps and cracks in there, so fill each of them up. And then finally the manhole cover. This is actually the manhole cover. We need to get a better one. At the moment it's just this, but the insulation needs to cover that as well. So feel free to ask me more questions about insulation, but that's what you're aiming at. I promised to explain what I meant by the diminishing value of return when it comes to ceiling insulation. And what that's about is that the more ceiling insulation you start with, the higher the R value you start with, the less return you're going to get by adding to it. So to bring us to the sort of beginning point, if you have almost no insulation, say 0.5, which is almost nothing, and you increase it to R3, you're actually going to get a really big return, because there's a big change in the heat transfer that goes through that level of insulation. Whereas if you have R3 and you increase it to R6, which is the same amount, it's another R3, the return will be much less. And that's because you had more to begin with, and the additional amount does reduce heat transfer, but nowhere near as much as the original amount did. So that's why if you have almost no insulation or none, then definitely it's, absolute no-brainer to get good ceiling insulation and go as high as you can. If you're going to install it, go for R5 if you can. The extra cost won't be that much, and it will be well worth it. But if you already have R3.5, then it would be worth considering the cost to upgrade it. You're not going to get as big a return. That doesn't mean it's not worth doing, but the return, the financial return from saving you heat loss is not going to be as big. After you've looked at draft proofing your home and making sure the ceiling insulation has good thickness and coverage, the next thing that's really important to do is improve windows. Our house we just had incredibly thin single glazed window panes, but luckily we had timber frames. And if you're lucky and you've got an older house, you'll have timber frames too. That is what they used to mainly be. The reason timber frames are so good is that they don't transfer heat well, which is what we want. The aluminium frames that became popular later and are still really popular today are incredibly good at transferring heat, which is actually the opposite of what you want. You want your windows to stop heat moving through them, not encourage it. So lucky for us, we had all timber frames, and that gives us a lot of options. But still, we didn't do improvements to our windows as the third thing, which we really should have, but it just seemed too complicated. We didn't know where to start. And we've ended up with a whole bunch of different options for windows. So that's fortunate for you because you get to see a whole lot of different ways you can improve your windows. The two main ways that you can reduce heat, just ambient heat, moving through your windows is with the frames and windows and the window coverings. So firstly, I'll talk about the frames and windows. One option you have, if you have old, thin, single glazed windows, is to completely replace them. Now, we did this after a fashion, but we did it secondhand. So we used to have a front door somewhere else, and instead we knocked out part of the wall and installed this set of French doors, which was secondhand off somewhere, some online marketplace, can't remember where. But because we were getting a new window, we made sure it was double glazed, and it's really good quality. It has good sealing around the edges, and yeah, perfect replacement. So that is one way you can do it. I won't tell you that our builder was happy with us, because whenever you get something secondhand, it's pretty much never going to fit exactly in the space that you want it to fit. So he had quite a bit of head scratching and that sort of thing to try and get it to fit perfectly in the spot that we wanted it. So don't discount installation costs when you're thinking of, you might think, oh, I've got this fantastic cheap second-hand window, but don't forget you've got to actually get someone to put it in for you. Another way that we achieve double glazing is by buying some pieces of double glazing, just the glass, through an online shop, and we got our handyman to install them. Now, just like with our French doors that I explained, the installation can add quite a bit to the cost, and it was the same with these. The double glazed windows, I think it was $100 for 10, so they were super cheap, but they didn't fit 100% into the existing frames. So the handy person had to create a wooden frame around them and then fit them into the existing timber frame. Now that was fine with us because we have a lot of windows and these are floor to ceiling as well. So it didn't matter to us that we lost a little bit of space, but it might matter to you. So these are all the options you can weigh up when you're deciding what to do. But this is a good way to use second-hand materials and more cost effective definitely than buying outright double glazed windows. You can see here how he's created this extra frame out of timber, but also then used beading to secure the glass inside it, and it's not perfectly done. There are some gaps and cracks there that we could fill up and paint, and we may one day, but it's not high on the priority list. What matters for us is that it's a really good effect, and the whole house feels warmer now that we have all our windows done. But this is another thing you can do. It's called secondary glazing. And secondary glazing covers, it's about a method where the original window, the frame and glass, stay completely intact. This makes it actually a really good option for heritage windows, stained glass windows, things like that, where the window itself is too beautiful to replace. But it's also a cheaper way to do it than buying new double glazed windows. So the way it works is the original window stays intact and you introduce a second layer that can be glass but is usually acrylic, and you cut it to size and attach it. In this instance, our handyman has bought big sheets of acrylic and cut them to size and then attach them to the window with this timber beading. And I mean, you can see it's not perfectly cut, and there are some gaps around the place. Again, we could fill them if we want to, we just can't really be bothered. But you can, I should say, if you are looking for a much more professional job, there are a couple of companies that do this professionally, and if you use them, then you will get an amazing finish that you won't know is not you know, just a double glazed window. It's the finish will be perfect. But if you want to do it yourself, this is quite a good DIY option if you're at all handy. So cutting acrylic to size and just simply attaching it. And what he's done is added some sort of filler between the timber beading and the acrylic just to seal any gaps. Because the thing with double glazing is that a lot of people don't realise the insulative effect that you get from it is not from having extra panes of glass. It's from the gap that's in between. And so secondary glazing, you need to aim for a gap that's 10 or 12 millimetres. That's the ideal gap. And that's going to give you the best insulating effect. We've looked at double glazing and also secondary glazing, and this is a third option, which is a film, a window film. So I don't mean a tint, I don't mean a film that goes onto the glass, I mean a film that is attached to the frame and creates an air space, which gives you an insulative effect. Now, the couple of brands I know of are called Clear, Comfort and Duck. They're considered to be temporary options because you can take them off, but having used it, I know that when you take it off, it often will pull off the paint and leave a lot of mess to fix up. Now, this is the very first way we tried to get double glazing effect on our windows many years ago, and we needed it at a really low cost. It's probably the cheapest option you have, but it is tricky. It's a fiddly job, and we found that in half the house, the sheets just pulled up after a week, and we had to redo them. We redid them a few times and then we just gave up. Whereas in other parts of the house like this, they're still there. Now this, I have to say, the reason that you can see where the adhesive tape is because this is literally 15 years old. This has been on here for 15 years, so long that the tape has yellowed. It's pretty ugly, but this is behind a curtain in a bedroom, so we're not fussed. The thing is, it's still there and it's still creating that gap, so it's stood the test of time, but only in one part of the house. Anyway, if you see that sort of a solution advertised, that's what they're talking about. So with windows, the two things you can do is improve your glazing, the glass and the frames. The other thing you can do is improve your window coverings. So if all of the options with glazing and frames are too hard or financially non-viable for you, a really good option is just to get really good window coverings. So the very best kind of window coverings are ones that seal the window, seal the air, so that air can't across the window pane. That's how you lose or gain heat. So the best option is going to be a heavy lined curtain with a pelmet, and that's what you can see here. To be the most effective, they need to cover the window from both sides, top and go right down to the bottom. And that effectively seals the air in there and stops the airflow across the glass and keeps your warmth where you want it. So it covers the sides like this. Only one of them is hooked around the side, but you can see that air can't get through there. It goes down to the bottom, so air's not going there either. And although it's a bit hard to see it, we do have a pelmet on this heavy lined curtain. It's an invisible pelmet. So this is what you can do if you don't want one of the big boxy ones. I'm sure it's not quite as efficient as the boxy ones that go right around the front of the window of the curtain. But I don't know if you can see that there. It's a piece of clear acrylic, and it has simply been, I don't know if I can reach up high enough. Can you see a screw that has been screwed through the acrylic and onto the top of the window frame? That's what holds it there. And the way pelmets work is that generally, if there's no pelmet there, you have warm air rising. It touches the top of the glass and flows down the glass as it cools down, pushes more warm air up, and you end up with a circulating effect. But the pelmet there stops that, and that's why it's an energy efficient design. If heavy lined curtains really aren't your thing, and I know they're not a lot of people's thing, and you really want some sort of blinds, then it is possible. The main thing to remember is just have them fitted so that they have the least possible gaps on the side and the top and the bottom of the window frame. So if you have a blind that's, leaving this much space, you can see light through it basically, that air's going to be passing through that gap all the time, and that's going to make it less thermally efficient. So keep that in mind. If you have deep window reveals, that's where the window and the window is sitting deeply in from where the frame is. They're ideal because you can fit something like a honeycomb blind right inside that space, really snugly to the sides, top and bottom, and that gives a really good seal too. However you decide you want to upgrade your windows, it can be quite a big cost, and there are a couple of things you can do to reduce the cost. One is, depending on the house, some houses have way more ventilation from windows than they need, and our house was a good example of this. Every single window in our house was openable. Now, you definitely want ventilation, and a couple of you need to know that air's going to move through a room, and you definitely need windows that open on the north and south, which is where the prevailing breeze flows. But if every single window is openable, one way to reduce the cost of improving them is simply to swap it for fixed, and we did that. So whether we were having the double glazed glass put into the timber frames or the secondary glazing, either way it was a lot easier for the handyman to do it if he didn't have to work around an opening twister or just the opening lever on a window. That just makes the whole thing more complicated. And the same if you're buying completely new double glazed units. If you want openable ones, it's just, it's more technology that goes into it. The other way is to simply pick and choose where you're going to do it. So as an energy assessor, I would usually, and if the cost of double glazing an entire house is prohibitive, then start with the areas that you are in most of the time and that are going to be heated and cooled most of the time. Really, they're the ones that are going to make the biggest impact on your comfort and your energy efficiency. So in our house, that would be, we've got a kitchen with a lounge room that's sort of combined. The rest of the house is bedrooms and bathrooms, so they're not as important. We're not in them during the day. So for us, it would have been just to concentrate on this main room and forget the rest till we've got a bit more of a budget to play with. Once you've looked at upgrading the thermal efficiency of your windows that inside, so that's the glass and frames and the window coverings, the final thing to look at is shading outside. Now, adding things like double and secondary glazing aren't going to help at all if you have, in summer, if you have direct sunlight coming through the window. That direct sunlight is still going to go straight through the double glazing, just like the single glazing. The only way to really help stop excess heat gain in summer is external shading, and it can be pretty much anything. This is an example of a really simple, cheap option. It's shade cloth that's rolled around a piece of timber that has got hooks and a pulley. My dad made this for us when we first moved here, and that's 18 years ago, and it's still working. So that's been amazing for us. This is the west side of our house, so that shades top and bottom windows all the time. Of course, you can get shading, you can get retractable canvas blinds that are either manually operated or remote operated. You can use plants. We also do that. We have some beautiful ornamental grapes that grow up over the west and north faces of the house to give us shelter in summer. You can get awning blinds, pergolas with any sort of plant climbing over. There's lots of options. After you've looked at drafts and ceiling insulation and windows, the next things to look at are both wall and underfloor insulation. Now, a lot of people just throw the idea of wall insulation out the window because they don't realise that you don't actually have to dismantle the wall. You don't have to take off weatherboards or do anything like that to get yourself wall insulation these days. So how do you get wall insulation? Well, it's actually pretty easy. It's blown in with a long hose. The hose is, 100 metres long enough to sit on our front drive and go right around our entire house, I can tell you that. And the way they get it in is just by drilling little holes in either weatherboards or brick. We've got a bit of both, so I can show you the way both are done. So I'll do a couple of close-ups, but it's called insul fluff, the stuff they blow in. If you think of cotton wool, it's like really light cotton wool in tiny little buds, and it gets blown through a tube a bit like a reverse vacuum cleaner. So they do need to check where all the wall studs are so they can blow it in above and below and make sure they don't miss any spots. But the job itself is it's easy for them. It would be very difficult to do yourself, but if they come and do it, it's really achievable, and they do a fantastic job. That's an example of the hole where they have drilled a little hole into the weatherboard and then filled it up before they left. We sanded it. Perhaps didn't do as good a job of sanding as we could have, but fine for us, and just repainted. And honestly, from a distance, you wouldn't know it was there. For pumping wall insulation into brick veneer, not sure if you'll even see this unless I point it out, but this is an example of where they've drilled a hole and then just filled it with a little bit of mortar before leaving, and job done. So for our house, it's a 3-bedroom house, fairly small house in Melbourne. Wall insulation for the whole house, all external walls, was about $3,500, and that's through Enviroflex, who we think do a really good job. But so it's not as cheap as draft proofing and ceiling insulation, but it is well worth considering. This shows the beautiful underfloor insulation job Sean has done on our house. So we're in Melbourne. We've been in lockdown now for a long time. We originally had somebody else that was going to put this all in, but once lockdown started, we thought, well, we may as well, and Sean took on that job. It's been a big job because underfloor areas are large, and see how our house is on a slope. The further up into that corner he got, the harder it was, and I think right in the very corner part he just couldn't fit his body and the insulation as well. But that's what well installed underfloor insulation looks like. So on our roof you can see two things there. On the right hand side is the evacuated tubes for our solar hot water system. They are round as opposed to the flat plate system, and the beauty of the evacuated tubes is that roundness means they can pick up heat from a variety of angles when the sun's shining. On the left is just a few of our solar panels. We haven't got a big system, but most of them are hidden over the back of the house. There's nowhere really that I can think of you can see them, and the ones on the back of the house are tilted up. This is the north facing roof. We've already shown you the evacuated tube solar hot water tubes on the roof, but this is what the system looks like under the house. So this is the instant gas boost, and in here you can see the tank. It's a really big one, but the plumber has done an amazing job of lagging. That means insulating all the pipes. So this is lagging. If you haven't got this on your hot water system and you're not planning on replacing it anytime soon, you should have lagging. See how it just keeps going? That should go under the entire house to wherever it comes out of the hot water tap. When we first moved here, there were a couple of indoor gas space heaters. It was almost 20 years ago, and the one in the living room was actually an unflued gas space heater, which is pretty awful, as you can imagine, with all those gas fumes coming into the house. It took a while, but we have finally upgraded to air conditioning. Air conditioning is actually the most energy efficient form of heating that you can choose. It's about 400 or 500 times efficiency if you get a high star rating one, and we made sure ours were either 4 or 5 star rated. When I talk about how energy efficient heating is, I should elaborate a bit. So it's about the heat energy you get from a unit of fuel, and the fuel could be wood, gas, electricity. So in the case of the air conditioner, 1 unit of energy in our 5-star air conditioner is likely to give us 5 units of heat, and that's because it isn't just using that electricity to directly create heat. It's using it to power the air conditioning technology, which is more about changing liquids into gases and solids so that it can pull heat out of the air and reject heat into the air. So I'm not going to talk about all of the details of that, but it's a different way of using heat. So in comparison, an electric heater, a plug-in electric heater, will take a unit of heat and turn it directly into a unit of electricity and turn it into a unit of heat. That makes them very inefficient. A open fireplace is the most inefficient option you have. It's about 5% efficient because 95% of the heat goes up the chimney, and say a gas ducted heater is, I think, about 90% efficiency. It loses a little bit from the combustion of the gas. Feel free to ask me more about that if you like, but I just wanted to explain what I meant.